Jeff Lavender wants to say something, so I'll ask Jeff to come at this time. And remember, Jeff used to have poems. Remember that? Years ago? He was the poet laureate of the Company of One.
How fortunate it is, we are blessed that the Company of One was not able to meet at a hotel, at a resort, someplace else, but to meet in a body, a church, where it all began. I'm just so thankful for that. And I'm thankful for the people that put that all together. We're just so blessed for that. And as Ron said, last night I had him up here, and I thought I'd had something prepared, but I got stuck. But after last night and the experience, I was able to finish what God had gotten me started on. Last night was a remarkable night, really. Ron Key delivered another powerful message about Jesus, same then, today, and tomorrow. Much as Ron has been the same for us, then, now, and tomorrow. And by the way, on behalf of the Company of One, we're sorry for half of the gray hair that he has. And we know the other half is the antics that Ron and Weldon pulled, and worried about whether they were going to get away with it. But it really just God's key for us to use. What key would you use to open up that door that lets you into that room which you've not gone before? Or the key to the gate that opens to an unknown trail which leads to a place over yonder hill and dale? Who was that special key to the box of hidden treasures? Who can provide it to you to enjoy your wildest pleasures? Well, God has given it to us, for Jesus was it, you see, and God provided a courier we know as Ron Key. And no pun intended, but well done. Well done, good and faithful servant.
I'm just glad my mother didn't name me Don. Some of you think I am, but we've been talking for the last week about a word that many of us use, that for some of us, that word conjures up pain and hurt. For some of us, that word conjures up hope. For some of us, that word conjures up emptiness. It's the word home. And all of us want a place that we call home. A place where it's all in free, where you feel like you're safe, and you feel like you can relax and be the person you really are. And I guess that's why, of all people to have told the 3 stories in Luke chapter 15, Jesus was the only one who could really speak about what home is. He tells 3 stories, one of them about a shepherd who loses a sheep, one of them about a lady who loses a coin, and the last one is about a father who loses a son. And all 3 stories are told in the context of home. The first 2 stories, Jesus concludes them with this saying, "So there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents or comes home." And that little sentence, it just is a peculiar way for Jesus to describe what goes on in heaven. Because he tells us in that one little sentence that heaven cares about home. And that when heaven sees a person wandering around lost, as Mike described for us earlier, that heaven rejoices when that person with backpack stops in mid-path and realizes, I'm lost. I need to go home. And so that person turns around. And we don't think about heaven erupting in applause when one person stops, takes count of where he or she is, and realizes, I am lost. And I need to stop going this direction, and I need to turn around and go home. And so Jesus says that in heaven, people pay attention when folks repent and start going home. But the last story that he tells is about a prodigal son. And last week we heard about this boy who was the second. His older brother, who was to get 2/3 of the family estate, was a good kid. But the second boy, home just didn't cut it. And so he went to his dad and said, I want you to give me the portion of my inheritance that's coming to me. Basically telling his father, let's cut to the chase. Let's just act as though you've died, and you give me what's coming to me. And I'm out of here. And we all realize that parents' job is to prepare their children to leave the nest. Stoney told us on our trip to Germany that at a particularly rough time in his life when he was in junior high, he was hanging around with the wrong kids, with the wrong people. And his dad came home one day after he had to go to the principal's office with his son. And his dad said, Stoney, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to research eagles. And Stoney, his dad said, tell me what you know about eagles. And Stoney told him everything he could conjure up about eagles, which wasn't much. And his father said, you need to learn more about eagles. And Stoney went out and researched the subject. And his dad brought him back in and said, now tell me what you've learned. And he said eagles were made to soar. They're made to be able to fly in storms where other birds can't. Eagles are amazing animals made by God. And his dad nodded. And then his dad said to Stoney, God made you an eagle. And you're hanging out with chickens. And that moment changed his life. Because you see, eagles, what happens to eagles when they're in the nest, there comes a time when the eagle tears up the nest. So the little eaglets are forced to fly. And it's there they discover their home, that they were made by God to fly. And so parents understand their responsibility is to get their children ready to soar like eagles. That's what they're supposed to do. And so this father had tried his best to prepare his son to soar. But his son didn't really grasp what home was. And so Jesus continues his parable. And I want us to talk about, just for a while, this morning, leaving the nest. Point number one is this. Have you gathered all you have? Jesus says these words. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. I try to put myself in these moments. I can't imagine the awkwardness of this. The son had come to his father and said, I want you to give me everything I have coming to me. And then for the next several days, the boy carried on his program of leaving his home, and the father had to watch it all unfold. The father had to watch the boy sell the land or come up with the price that the land would be sold for. Because back in this time, you weren't allowed to sell your land until the father actually died. And so the boy had to sell futures. He had to sell futures and talk to people and say, if my father died, how much do you think the land would be worth? And then would you give me the money so that when my dad does die, you will get this land? And the boy had to liquidate all that the father had given him, and the father watched it all happen. He watched his boy come in and out of his room. He watched his boy pack up his belongings. He watched his boy go visit people and exchange money for money that would be transferred in a far country. And the father watched all this happen, and there was not a blessed thing he could do about it. And the father realized, as we'll later read in the parable, that his son, in that point, was dead to him. And so the father had to watch his boy sum up what home meant. And the boy decided that home means money. That's it. It's not about relationships. It's not about values. It's not about love. It's not about grace. It's not about mercy. It's about money. And I am going to cash in. I'm going to liquidate. I'm going to make all of this that I've been putting up with for years come to mean something to me and put money in my pocket so I can go someplace else and get on with the rest of my life and be free of what I've had to put up with for the last several years. Now there's a little ceremony that Jews do when they come into their homes and when they walk out of their homes. There's a little place in the doorpost where they put what's called a mezuzah. And a mezuzah is an aperture that they have a piece of paper rolled up with the scripture that's written on the piece of paper, and on the outside of the piece of paper is written El Shaddai, which is the name of God. And so when they come into their home, they put their fingertips on that little place on their doorpost. And when they leave in the morning, they put their fingertips on that to remind them that they belong to God. And this is what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 15. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you with great and good cities that you didn't build, and houses full of good things that you didn't fill, and cisterns that you didn't dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you didn't plant, and when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. And you shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are around you. For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God, lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from off the face of the earth. Every day that boy, his mom and dad had taught him, when you come into the house, you touch the mezuzah. When you leave for the day, you touch the mezuzah, and you do not forget God. And I have to believe that when he liquidated all his stuff, and he packed his backpack, and he left home, when he walked out the door, he didn't touch the mezuzah. In Luke chapter 2, verse 19, we read a very simple sentence. I think a sentence that describes what home really is. And this is the sentence. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. The boy had a relationship with his dad that he didn't even understand. He had a relationship with the family, with the workers, with his dad's culture, with his dad's purposes. And the boy looked at home and at family, and he came to the conclusion, all that matters out of all of this is the money in my pocket. And he walked out the door. And the boy thought he was leaving to live. And his daddy, as he walked out the door, looked at his son and thought to himself, my son is dead. And so often in life, we look at circumstances and we give them the wrong value. We think the value is this, when really the value is this. And all of a sudden, years later, we look back at those moments and we understand what the word home really means. And it's not about an inheritance. It's not about a will. It's not about an old car or a chest of drawers. It's not about a silver tea set. It's not about anything of material value. It's so much more than that. And so this morning, I just want to ask you, have you gathered all that you have? Have you looked back at your life and instead of giving a monetary value to it, have you looked back and do you realize, as Mary, that you treasure all these things in your heart and you thank God for home? And you thank God that there's a safe place. And you thank God that there's a place that has value and worth and that matters and that has purpose and meaning. And you understand it's not just a place you put your car in the garage and you sleep in a bed. It's much more than that. It's home. And you are there when Jesus tells his disciples, Father and I will come and make our abode with you. That's home. Point number 2. Have you gotten far enough away? It says that he took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. Now, I suppose that this young boy, or we don't exactly know what his age is, but in his mind, he understands and he perceives that he looks at life the way it really is. And he's got money in his pocket, and he's put his dad in his rearview mirror, and he's gone to a far country, far enough away that they don't know who he is, who his dad is, who his God is. They don't know anything about him except that he has money and he's willing to spend it. And so he makes instant friends. Now, I think this morning, as we Americans look at our lives, it's real easy to think that the American dream is what it's all about. And as we look at our lives in this moment, we think about the money we have in our pockets. And it's money that will finance a good time. Because that's what life's about, is having a good time. And so we're told that this young man squandered his property in reckless living. Now, those are interesting words, squandered and reckless. I'm so thankful he did not have a credit card. I suppose you could use words like fritter away, or exhaust, or blow it. But whatever, he didn't have any money when it was all over. And Jesus tells this story in the third person. He didn't tell it in the first person as if the story happened to him, but he told it in the third person. And Jesus understands that there are times in our lives when we need to get away. It's always good if your kids are a little bit away. If your parents are a little bit away. It's always good if there's a little distance, because that way you can sort of relax. And I know it's hard to understand that when you go see your parents and you have a great time and you enjoy them and they enjoy you, it's hard to understand what happens when the door is closed and you go get in your car. What happens in the house after you leave? What kind of scene that is. When your mother and father go, I thought they'd never leave. Or you get in the car and say, man, I'm glad we're out of here. And all of a sudden you realize there is some healthy good to distance. Even Jesus in Mark chapter 6, when the disciples, they fed 5,000 people and the disciples are exhausted, and Jesus tells the disciples, let's get away for a while. And the disciples are going, thank you, this is great. Because Jesus understands there is a need sometimes for distance. But David says in Psalms chapter 139, verses 7 through 12, he says these words, where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand will hold me. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me, and the light around me be night. Even the darkness is not darkness to you. The night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light with you. You can't get away from God. You might think you can. It's like a kid hiding behind the curtain from his parents, thinking that they can't see him because he can't see them. All the while, his little feet are sticking out from underneath the curtain. And if you think for a moment that God's in heaven saying to himself, now where did she go? God knows exactly where you are. And he understands that sometimes you want him to leave you alone. But you know what? He just won't. He just won't. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 7, the one who told this story, these are the words spoken of him. He made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant and being born in the likeness of men. Jesus told a fictional story about a man who had 2 sons. And Ralph Waldo Emerson says it's the best story in the Bible or out of it. So I'm kind of wondering this morning, is there anybody here who's in a far country today? On purpose. Because you want God to leave you alone. Well, I want to tell you something. When you're in a far country and you've gotten as far away from God as you think you can get, even there, he's waiting for you. Point number 3. Have you anything to show for the journey? When it's all done, and you spent all your money, you spent all your resources, you're all alone, you're all by yourself, you don't have anything, let me just ask you this question. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Do you have anything to show for your journey? Because in Luke 15, verse 14, Jesus continues the story, and this is what he says. And when he had spent everything, my mother used to say, your money's burning a hole in your pocket. When he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Mark Allen Powell had 12 students in a seminary class, and he wanted them to read this story, and then after they read the story, he wanted them to tell each other the story. And so they read through this story, which takes 22 verses 3, 5 minutes. He had them close their Bibles, and he said, okay, now I want you to tell each other the story. And none of the 12 seminary students who are retelling the story to each other mentioned the famine. They forgot about it. Now, Powell thought that was interesting, that they could read the story and that one little thing would slip and they wouldn't tell it to the other people that were listening. And so he decided to do a larger experiment, and he had 100 people do this. And out of the 100 people that told the story, he discovered that only 6 mentioned the famine. Only 6. wanted to make sure that the group, the 100 students, were diverse socially and economically, and sure enough, they were all diverse. So there wasn't a reason for them to forget it, to leave it out. And so he decided, well, maybe this is an American problem. So maybe I'll go to another country and I'll have them do the same exercise and we'll see if there's any difference. So he went to Russia, to St. Petersburg, Russia, and he gathered 50 participants in Russia to read the same story and then to close their Bibles and to retell the story of the prodigal son to each other. And you know what he discovered? 42 of the 50 included the famine. So then all of a sudden he realized that the way you read Scripture sometimes might have something to do with where you live. Because people in America thought it was horrible that the prodigal son squandered his wealth. But people in Russia said that wasn't the horrible part. The horrible part was he left his daddy in the first place. And the horrible part, that there was a 3-year famine. And then he couldn't understand, why do these Russian people think this famine is such a big deal? Because in 1941, the Germans besieged St. Petersburg, Russia. And they allowed these people in St. Petersburg to starve to death. And 670,000 Russian people died from this famine. And so the people of St. Petersburg, famine was very vividly on their mind. And a lot of people think if there hadn't been a famine, the prodigal son might have skated scot-free. But because there was a famine, he had no place to turn. Which tells us, and Jesus is telling the story, if you think that you can outsmart God, and you think you have the potential to live your own life independent of anybody, any place, you will run out of resources, but God will make sure you will come face to face with something you can't handle. And in that moment, God will wait patiently for you to stop, backpack on your back, and realize, I'm lost. I need to go home. And in that moment, you will remember and realize for the first time that home can't be defined by money. Home is much more than that. Because the Bible tells us that though Jesus was rich, for your sakes, he became poor. And he set up a home in Nazareth for wandering sons to come home to. Fred Craddock tells a story of a schoolmate who he had helped send to China as a missionary. And the schoolmate had 2 children, I believe he did, and he was put under house arrest in China, and soldiers came to his home and said he was going to be allowed to go home, but he could only take 200 pounds with him. 200 pounds. We've lived in China all this time, and you're only going to let us take 200 pounds home? Well, that's right, you can only take 200 pounds. So the whole family had a big family meeting. What are we going to take? Well, I want to take these toys, I want to take these books, I want to do, and so they started gathering all the things they wanted to take that they believed was part of home, and they gathered them all together, and they weighed them too many pounds, so they had to jettison some of these things. Finally, they came up with 200 pounds. They got it all boxed up. The soldiers came back to their home and said, "Are you ready?" And they said, "Yes, we're ready." And then the soldiers looked at the gentleman and his wife and asked this question: "Did you weigh your children?" And they said, "No, we didn't." And in a blink of an eye, what was a treasure became trash. Because the kids are what matter. That's what home is. And to the father who had to give up his inheritance to a son who was dead to him, and had to watch his son prepare to leave his house and pack up his gear and walk out and not touch the menorah, the mezuzah, for the father to watch his son walk out, knowing full well that the son was making bad decisions. And the father just had to wait. Because he knew, as we all know, that you can run, but you can't hide. And God was waiting for the prodigal son when he didn't have any money, and he didn't have any place else to turn. God was there for him. Because that's what home is. Now, there may be somebody here this morning that you are in that place. There may be some of you in this morning who are like the dad who are waiting for the son to come back. There may be some of you who are in a situation right now where you are so full and so thankful for what God has given you. And I praise God for that. But Jesus told this story for a reason. It's fiction, but we all know it's so true. And so this morning, I just want you to know, number one, you are accountable. You won't live forever. You can't please everybody. You'll never catch up with the Joneses.